All right, welcome to the Deleted Scenes Directors and Editors Commentary. I'm here with the director, Darren Joshua, and I'm Simon Beasley, the editor. Darren, take us away with this first scene. Wow, what made it sort of hit the floor?
Yeah, this is one of the earlier scenes to hit the cutting room floor. It's basically an establishing scene of the character Huff, played by Joshua Fragum and later played by Christian Bennett when the elder. And it was just basically to give us a background and insight into the character himself. And you can see he's living in a bit of an unsavory situation, and it sets him up as a little bit of a petty thief already. So it kind of sets the tone of the journey that we're gonna follow him on. Yeah, I don't know, Simon, do you want to talk about why it had to hit the floor? Or...
Yeah, I think with this scene and the scene that follows that you guys are going to see next, it was nice sort of character setup for them as children, but ultimately with a film that ended up being 2.5 hours long, there were some sacrifices that had to be made, and I think essentially when they were kids, the focus became more about AB and Gimba and the relationship and backstory there. And it was unfortunate that we had to drop these scenes, as they were nice insight into the characters.
In real life, I mean, John, the writer, he said that the character of Silas used to work at the docks, where they worked at some kind of fishing place there, and she would often also moonlight as a little bit of a call girl. And this situation is basically the the results of a night, a debaucherous night. Okay, so here we have another one of those scenes that we spoke about before, just delving into the background of one of the younger boys. In this case, it's Shorty, played by Valentino de Klerk, and he's later played the older Shorty. Shorty is later played by Christian Mias. And the scene just gives us some insight into his home situation, and shows us that each one of the boys are struggling with some kind of domestic issue. And in his case, it's that his dad. We discover that his dad is a bit of a, what would you call it, Simon?
I don't know, a bit of a flirt.
Bit of a flirt, but he's definitely like cheating. By the looks of it, he's cheating on Shorty's mother. And obviously Shorty reacts badly, and this is the kind of thing that almost pushes him to the streets, so to speak.
And quite a sad scene to lose, because it does show Shorty's home environment in terms of the other kids. And all that. Shorty does come from probably the most affluent home.
Yeah, you can see they have a maid in the background, which was not something that's normal on the Cape Flats back in the 60s.
So this is the scene directly after AB had been raped, which we unfortunately had to let go. What were your sort of thoughts and thinking on this?
Yeah, I think in the script, in the one of the earlier drafts that I read, John he wrote the entire sequence of what he did after he returned home from being raped on in the scrapyard, and there were a couple of grim scenes in there where we see him getting rid of his underwear that's filled with blood, etc. And this scene over here is that evening he considered telling his mother what happened to him on the scrap heap, but according to John, he was because of, for various reasons, to him personally, he felt ashamed of what happened to him and decided not to tell anyone. And this scene, he nearly tells his mom, but loses his nerve. And she thinks it's just, she doesn't know the better, she doesn't know what's happened to him.
In this scene, we've got the 4 youngsters.
This is after they started the game, and they basically, I think this is like in the script. It was straight after they had that little incident at the dice game. And they basically used the money they stole there to buy like alcohol and cigarettes, or in this case, I don't even think it's cigarettes. I think it's like dacha, as far as I know.
What was nice about this is that it really sort of established the storyteller element in AB, and how he was, again, on the high seat, the center of attention, telling stories even way back then.
Yeah, that's true. He's telling a story here, which is kind of a story/joke about this guy that he heard of that broke into this house, and after assessing what he could steal, like he looked at pills and diamonds and all kinds of things. He eventually ends up stealing the dog. Obviously, he does a way better job than I did, than I just did about telling the story. Yeah, so yeah, it does kind of it does strengthen that whole storytelling element that he has. It gives us a sign of things to come.
Fuck it, taking this man talks me, bro. Fuck it.
This is a bit of a difficult one. This scene was part of a sequence where we just basically showed the boys getting up to more mischief. In this particular scene, should have followed a scene where we see them get into a bit of a skirmish with some police. But because of various production constraints, etc., weather, etc., we weren't able to film the first part of the sequence, which was one of the reasons that led to us cutting the scene. But in the end, I mean, I think the film still worked without it.
Yeah, and in fact, in this particular moment, Mr. C is interrogating the kids and trying to find out who stole his dacha from earlier. And I think actually losing this scene added to the overall film, in that instead of the kids owing Mr. C anything for stealing his dacha, it makes Mr. C come across more predatory and sort of preying on the young kids to sort of do his dirty work for him, which I think ultimately kind of adds to his whole character.
Yeah. The other thing that should have preceded the scene that was in one of the earlier drafts is the fact that Mr. C actually confronted his son about his stolen dacha. And when I'm speaking about stolen dacha, it's a dacha that AB steals to free Shorty from far away. One of the earlier scenes shows Mr. C confronting his son Gimba and then beating him up, blaming him for the stolen dacha. And as you'll see at the end of the scene, as AB's finishing sweeping, Gimba basically interrogates him as to where the stolen dacha went to.
Hoekom het hy die dacha gesteel? En wat die fuck is die dacha?
Lang story.
Een fucking lang story. Met top het gedink as ek.
Yes, bye.
This scene was one of my favorites. Really unfortunate that we had to cut it.
En 2 pakkies Bakers biscuits.
Stay on.
Yeah, I mean, we had quite a bit of fun filming this one. I was really sad to see this go. But if you look at it, like if you accumulate all the scenes that we cut with the boys just showing all the mischief they get up to, you see that shot where he's eating the sweets. He really enjoyed doing multiple takes of that. But to get back to it, I think if we accumulated all the scenes we cut, I think it amounts to like over an hour of film. That would have made the final cut, and we couldn't we in the end we were forced to cut it down to what was it?
Effectively 40 minutes.
Young ones, darling with the young ones, and the young.
So this scene follows
The cinema.
the cinema, yeah, where just basically they just watch the young ones, obviously highly inspired by Cliff Richard's musical performance. They come walking down the street, belting the song out, which is basically where they get the name of their gang from as well, the Young Ones. And they walk past this church that Avi's mother belongs to. And apparently this is something that obviously actually did happen to John, and he was a bit embarrassed as you see, what happens in the scene is that his mother had the gift of speaking in tongues, and they happened to stumble into the church in one of the moments where she, let's call it, displayed her talents. So the mother's played by Sandy Schultz, and this was her very first scene that she filmed on the film, and she had to basically come and perform and speak in tongues.
Revelations 5 verse 5. Weep not. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed. Fear not. Though thou touch your fall to the valley of death, fear shall pervade thy house.
Yes, Lord. This is a foot-stomping devil chasing.
Just to give you context, this scene would have fallen just before Abie and his mum were seated at the kitchen table where she's reading the Bible to him and effectively giving him the prophecy of his life.
Voor dit te laat is. Broers en susters, bid vanaand saam met my. Onze Vader, wat in die hemel is, laat die naam geheilig word. Laat die koninkryk kom. Laat die wil geskied, soos in die hemel, soos ook op die aarde. Gee ons vandag ons daaglikse brood en vergeef ons skulde, soos ons ook ons skuldenaars vergewe. En lei ons nie in versoeking nie, want aan U behoort die koninkryk en die krag en die heerlikheid tot in ewigheid. Amen en amen.
The scene you're watching now is basically the opening of Gimba's return. In the film, we only really got to see Abie's return home, and we felt that at that point we were zoning in on him as the sole protagonist. But we did do the scene, as you can see, where we basically see Gimba come home after his stint in prison. And basically just you can see his father's just having some friends over, some clients, so to speak, and yeah, having a bit of fun.
I think for me, what I liked by leaving the scene out is that in the scenes that follow, when you see Gimba with a gun and money, it sort of gets your mind thinking. You know, how did he get that from his sort of 28 brothers, from his father, and it sort of provided a couple of unknown questions. Whereas here we kind of show that he actually just steals it from old Tana.
Yeah, I think the way we do have it here, I did go to this more suspense, more mystery. But yeah, the true story was that this is, you know, the murder weapon. In real life, this is how he got the gun. He found it on one of his dad's henchmen.
Relax.
The way we dance to the way you changed my life. No, they can't take that away from me. No, they can't take that away.
Here we've got Huff arriving back at Titty's house, and actually you get to see here that the baby that Titty has at the end of the film when she sees Abie is actually Huff's. The scene falls directly before the boys are picked up and put in the holding cells for murdering Red Fez, and sort of Huff, realizing that an arrest is imminent, has his goodbyes with Titty.
Yeah, so you'll notice that a lot of the scenes that have fell by the wayside are scenes that just fleshed out each character a bit more. And I think if we contained all of them, we'd probably have to cut a short mini-series. But yeah, it was definitely a nicely performed scene, I thought.
Ek so 'n groot kak dit. Pieter het sy nie weet nie. Hoe laat jy me aangaan met jou lewe? Nog worry om my nie.
Robin, wag. Ek gaan nie geld hou vir jou verborg. Jy mis.
Is goed vir my, Titi.
When it came to the edit for the holding cell scenes, we actually changed it up quite a lot from the original script, and
yeah,
this scene in particular sort of just really shows the tension in the cell between the boys, and the fact that they, you know, were keeping silence against, or keeping quiet about AB's involvement in the crime.
Wat?
So yeah, basically Huff is questioning where he was that night, you know, and why he never arrived, because they were waiting for him on the corner. But obviously AB sees it a different way.
In many ways, it sort of feels like Huff really took it personally that AB had left them in the lurch, and in fact this is sort of his payback.
Is goed dink ja.
And then in this one now, as you can see, this is another scene set in the holding cell. Here, Shorty basically grows a conscience, and he starts to question the fact that they are framing AB for this murder.
Sorry, gehoond.
Wat is hier, Ricky?
AB.
Another funny anecdote about just the set that they're on is this is actually was one of the sets for well, what was left over of some of the sets for Long Walk to Freedom, and this is part of the cell that Nelson Mandela was actually in the film, Nelson Mandela's cell on Robben Island, because the whole prison set of Robben Island was still standing at Cape Town Film Studios. So we kind of just took the, Nelson Mandela's cell and just broke down the wall between the cell adjoining it and made it one big holding cell. This basically, what you're looking at now follows the courtroom. The boys have just been sentenced, and we know that they've received the death sentence. And one of the most common questions we get is, what happened to Mr. C afterwards. Obviously, this is a powerful man, and he would have wanted to take vengeance on AB. And in real life, he did try. He started to interfere with AB's family. As you can see, AB's father he's been beaten up by some of Mr. C's men. And in real life, they even started to damage AB's house when they were looking for him. And at some point, AB, as John in real life did, they got fed up with Mr. C trying to, or at least interfering with his family. And that led to him going to confront Mr. C. Basically beg him to leave his family out of this equation, and hopefully the two of them can sort it out like two men.
Yeah, this was a tough one to cut. I think it had quite a lot of scale, and as you'll see, it erupts into a full-scale shootout. And I think, you know, it offered quite a lot of cinematic appeal, but at the end of the day, there would have been too many sort of endings for this film. I think when the boys are sentenced to death, it was really nice that the focus was on them and sort of John actually having to tell that story. This thrown into the mix would have felt like there were just too many endings.
Yeah, and at the same time, what we felt it also did was it kind of placed the film in a kind of a genre context, like it's this kind of a gangster thriller, which is what we weren't going for that. And it also, in a narrative sense, it just put a nice little bow on every story arc, because as you'll see, you know, it kind of concludes what happens to Mr. C, what happens to Hippie. You know, and the two of them kind of take each other out, which is too nice of a bow.
Too convenient.
Yeah, too convenient. And we felt that trivialized what we were trying to do with Numa Skole, which is basically tell the true account of John Fredericks' life.
And actually some questions, you know, that when you leave a film and the questions, what happened to Mr. C and all that, sometimes not answering those are it's even more powerful to do that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of limitations because it kind of was a low budget film, but this sequence, you know, we spent quite a lot of resources on it, and it was painful to cut, obviously. We had exactly 100 bullets to use in the sequence, which the stunt guys, when they heard that, they laughed and they thought it couldn't be achieved. But I think with some great editing from Simon over here, and some nice choreography from the stunt guys and myself, yeah, I thought we achieved something.
What was quite nice, actually, had we kept this scene, is we never actually show whether Mr. C dies or survives. It's sort of, there is that ambiguity there.
So what you're seeing now takes place after the boys have been sentenced and the court case is concluded. And what we wanted to achieve with this scene was just to conclude the arc of AB's dad with some hope, you know. And here we're witnessing him realizing that his son is coming good, and we're insinuating at some hope for him on his love life side, with his nosy neighbor. We got into a little bit of an argument early on in the film, played by Denise Newman in a wonderful cameo.